Hey folks, I want to jump in quickly to give you an update on where Personalist Manifestos has been, where it is now, and where it's going. Since the first conversation was posted on November 29th, 2025, a lot has happened in the world and a lot of interviews with contemplative revolutionaries have been shared to make sense of what's going on. As we approach the 50th episode mark, I look back on what's been done through this show with a sense of wonder. How the heck did we make it this far? How did I, someone with such limited technical knowledge about what it takes to consistently run a podcast and do it in a way that engages more than an audience of my immediate family and friends, manage to keep this thing going? And even more than that, run it in a way that reaches way more people than I ever thought it would. Well, the best way to answer this question is to answer it in a personalist way. It's the people who make Personalist Manifestos what it has been, what it is, and what it's becoming. The people who say, do, write, and make things that inspire the kinds of conversations that you encounter on this show. The people who engage, whether that's on Substack, podcast platforms, YouTube, and social media. The people who give their ideas, their time, their energy, and their money to this contemplative revolution project. For all those people who make what I'm trying to do here possible, I want to thank you. Sincerely thank you for your investment. It means so much to me, and it gives me so much hope in a world that is in desperate need of hope. And for those who are newer to the show, thank you for your interest. I don't take it lightly because I know that time, attention, and interest are in high demand and short supply these days. And if this show has encouraged or helped you in any way, here's where I need some help from you. Personalist Manifestos doesn't run paid advertisements. At this point, the show is funded by a mixture of three things: a few paid Substack subscribers, administrative and operational oversight from the International Jacques Ellul Society, 20% of subscription and donation earnings go to the society, and 80% goes to Personalist Manifestos for tech and operation expenses. And finally, my and my wife's bank account. At this point, we're not breaking even. We're getting closer to that point, but we're not there yet. But we are making the investments we are despite being a bit in the red because we believe in the value of this project. So if you want to help us break even, here are some things you can do. You can tell people about Personalist Manifestos. Tell people offline and online about the show. You can like and repost our posts. You can add us to your recommended reading, listening, and watching lists. You can leave reviews and rate us. You can pray for us if you're the praying type. You can suggest people to interview, topics to cover, work to feature, that sort of thing. And finally, you can support financially with either a monthly subscription, a yearly gift, or a one-time donation through Substack. And hear me when I say this, every little bit helps. I truly mean that. I did the math, and if everyone who currently follows this show gives $1 a month, that would be enough to cover our expenses for a year. Seriously, that's it. That's less than a cup of coffee these days. And note when I mention this, nobody associated with Personalist Manifestos is in this for the money. The ultimate financial goal at this point is to be able to fund the production and growth of this project without doing so at a financial loss. Which is to say, I would consider it a win if we could break even each year with nothing more and nothing less. Anything beyond net zero is just gravy to me, and it would be used to do things that we think would make Ellul and the Personalist proud. And if you want to actually speak with me about expenses, budgeting, and have me take you through what's going in and going out, I'm more than happy to do that. Just send me an email and we'll set up a time to chat. Okay? How does that sound? Again, thanks for your time and your support. And on with the show. Welcome back to Personalist Manifestos. I'm Michael Morelli, the host of this ongoing conversation about contemplative revolution. In this conversation, my fellow theologian and sports commentator Andy Root returns to the show to talk about his latest book, Evangelism in an Age of Despair. The title of a book that, for an Ellulian like me, who is looking for hope in a world filled with despair, raises my eyebrows and gets me to lean in. My guess is that for a lot of people listening, hearing that title will have a similar effect. The other thing I should mention is that Andy and I recorded this conversation on December 12th, 2025 at 1:30 p.m. Pacific Time. It's important to mention that detail because it proves, or at the very least implies, that Andy and I have prophetic giftings when it comes to the National Hockey League. Because when Andy asks me at the start of our conversation if I think former Canucks defenseman Quinn Hughes will be traded, I confirm my suspicion with some reasons given for that intuition, as does Andy. And for those of you who follow hockey, you will know that shortly after that prophetic word, Quinn Hughes was indeed traded to the Minnesota Wild, Andy's hometown hockey team. So, maybe if this whole theology thing doesn't work out for us, we have promising careers in hockey predictions ahead of us. Whether that's actually true or not is besides the point. The real point of our conversation is less about hockey trades and more about finding some consolation and some hope in a world overrun by despair. And so with that, here's my conversation with Andy. This is the pre-show show where Michael and Andy talk about hockey. So do you want to ask me the question that you just
Yeah.
asked me before I hit record?
Yeah, I wanna ask you if, what do you feel? Do you feel like Quinn Hughes is gonna leave Vancouver and say goodbye to Canada and link up with the other 2 Hughes brothers, or what do you think's gonna happen here?
I think so, to put it,
Yeah.
in short form. Um,
You seem
yeah.
sad. You seem really sad about it.
Well, yeah, I am. How do I feel about, the best defenseman?
Yeah.
Is that arguable? Do I have to preface that saying
Well, as
arguable?
an American, you're a Canadian. As an American, I completely agree with you, but some people may wanna look at that kid in, Colorado, um, Makar, and think maybe Makar's the best in hockey, but I agree, I think it's Quinn Hughes.
Yeah, I won't split hairs, I'll just say one of the best defensemen out there right now. I would
I
be
think
really
top 2 for sure, right?
Yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
really sad to see him go.
Mhm.
But I don't know. For me, this is my take. Tell me if you think it's on. I feel like the beginning of the end was trading JT Miller.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that's where it just kind of started. And then from there, it's
Yep.
just kind of, we've been sliding downhill. And then you add in the injuries, and it's just been painful.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree, I think, yeah, you lost your soul a little bit, the soul of the room, as they would say, but I'm sure JT is not an easy guy to be around, but, I don't know, he's got that sandpaper quality you probably need, so, yeah.
I do think about that a lot in terms of sport, but also any type of team culture. And, it's not too many steps to form an analogy of like a sports team or a band to like ecclesiology,
Yeah,
right? But I think
good
that's where
segue.
we're not segueing yet.
Okay, alright.
But I feel like trust is so important to
Yeah,
good to good teamwork, whether that's sport, whether that's creativity, whatever we're talking about, sport and creativity. If
yeah,
you don't have the trust dynamic, if you don't have the fun dynamic, then you
yeah,
lose that glue that creates an amazing team and an
yeah,
amazing performing team.
yeah,
I was actually talking with my friend Andrew, my other friend Andrew, about this in terms of the playoffs last year. Like you could see Toronto Maple Leafs just break down,
yeah,
like losing it on each other in the locker room. The
yeah,
moment that happens, you're losing on the ice because
right,
you're not feeling like your teammates got your back at that point when you go on the ice.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what's unique about hockey, to be honest. I mean, I'm biased here, but you have to have both, like, the room has to be kind of fun and a lot of joking, but there also has to be a sense like we have each other's back and like yeah, so there's and I think that's what you lost with JT Miller was like a guy like the kind of "F you" kind of, attitude that he was gonna have. So, yeah, I don't know. I think hockey's unique. I think that's like, you're completely right. Every sport kind of needs that, or every communal endeavor in some way, but there's something unique about a hockey room, I think, of, both the kinda looseness, but also the kind of like, we're willing to we're willing to take a punch in the face for each other, you know?
Yeah, that's where I think coaching becomes really key, um, where it takes a unique type of coach in order to address some of those things.
Yeah,
Like, if you've got an issue, address it, sort it
just
out,
deal
and
with
move
it.
it on.
Yeah. Yep.
And this is why I love Ted Lasso,
Yeah.
because Ted can take a Jamie Tart, and you could take a JT Miller and transform him,
Yeah.
right?
But Rick Tocchet couldn't.
Apparently not. Although Hughes did say, my understanding is Hughes did say that Tocchet was one of the best coaches he's ever worked with.
Yeah. I think Tockett's a great coach. I
Yeah,
think he is. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Um, so I'm wearing a Minnesota North Stars hat.
yeah. Which hurts.
Um, yeah, because I was in Minnesota recently for
Yeah.
beer camp, and I thought
Oh, yeah. That's right.
my eldest son, he's been playing NHL '93 on my old Super Nintendo.
Oh,
So
wow, yeah.
when I told him I was going to Minnesota, he was like, "Dad, get a Minnesota North Stars hat." So I got him one, and I got my youngest one. I got myself
Oh, that's
one.
cool.
Yeah, it's my little memento.
Yeah, where did you get them? At the
Just in the
you
airport.
in the airport, they had them good. Alright.
Yeah,
Uh,
they were a little bit
yeah, good for you.
pricey, but I thought when in
You gotta get
when
it.
in Minnesota, when in
Yep,
Rome.
yep.
Last hockey thing though, because you'll appreciate
Okay.
this. As of today, I
Yeah.
just purchased tickets to the Shoresy Winter
Oh, really?
Classic tour.
Okay. I have to
So
say I have not watched all Shoresy. I've watched, like, 3 episodes and found it very funny, but I don't know why I haven't gotten back to it. But, you know, I am a I do it's not consistent, but I would say at least, you know, like, for once a week, I'll listen to an hour of Spit Chicklets, you know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
yeah, the Shoresy, the Chicklets vibe is I get it, but yeah, so I appreciate what you're doing there.
Yeah, yeah. So again, for the uninitiated, Shoresy is a TV show that's a spinoff of another Canadian TV show called Letterkenny.
Yeah.
And it's about, you know, Canadian hockey and a fictional hockey team in a fictional league. Anyway, they do a little tour where the cast of the show plays against alumni of different hockey teams.
Okay.
So this is in Vancouver. They're playing Vancouver Canucks alumni.
Oh, wow, yeah, that'll be
So
fun.
I'm pretty pumped about that.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
that's cool.
Anyway, you are a returning guest to Personalist Manifestos, but for those who didn't tune in to the first episode that we had a chat about your previous book, do you want to share a little bit about who Andy Root is, and then we'll jump into talking about your new book?
Yeah, well, obviously you can see a hockey fan is who I am, but I live in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, actually in St. Paul, which is only important if you live here, but it's very important if you live here, which side of the river you live on. I'm in the better side, the humbler side. The snooty people like Tony Jones lives on the on the on the Minneapolis side. Um, and so, and yeah, I teach at Luther Seminary, and I've been here for quite a while, and that's my main gig is doing that, and yeah, talking to people on podcasts, I guess
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
And writing lots of books. That was going to be one of my questions that I didn't send you in advance is how do you manage to just publish so much? What's your secret?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked that obviously quite a bit, and I don't really know. I mean, it feels like evasive and kind of a tad bit arrogant to be like, I don't know, but in partly I don't. It's just like I guess I'm maybe my superpower is I can just do the same thing every day. Like, I can have a pattern and I can just stick to that pattern. Like, I think that's been really it is, you know, like, when I'm not traveling, when I'm home, I have a certain routine that I go through, every day, and I I don't get sick of that, and so, and I do think there's a kind of base level ability to kind of suffer, if you will, like
Oh, yeah.
there's a kind of ascetic practice, I think, to writing. I think some people there's a small percentage of people who just absolutely like love it, like it is amazing. And I think for all of us, there's a bit like running or something or exercise where you do get like adrenaline from doing it. You do, but it's painful. It's like you like working out. Like you're like, do I want to do this? Do I want to get up early and run? I mean, that's how it feels with writing to me too. But I think I've just spent enough time practicing that discomfort that I'm able to do the time, but I kinda live by blocks of time, which is maybe why I've written a bit about time too, so I just have been able to block out this, 3.5, 4 hours every morning and just be put myself in jail and stay in jail, and so yeah, it's never really thinking about getting things done, or I don't even, like, think, "Oh, I have to write 5 pages today," or "I have to write 15 pages today." I just try to do the practice of being in that time and just let it go however it goes. And yeah, so it's a bit of the tortoise and the hare kind of game. I just am the tortoise who just slowly tries to, yeah, to mix metaphors, carry the water. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's been okay. So this sounds so cliche, and it sounds a bit like an athlete just giving, dumb answers, but, I just take it one day at a time, that's all I
That's
do.
but that's but on it, I think that's
Yeah.
it. I think so much of it is consistency, and that's the very, um, non-idealistic,
Yeah.
demythologized, unromantic reality for most of us.
Yeah.
At
No, I
least for
mean,
me,
it
right?
is like sports in that sense, as someone who grew up playing hockey, like, there is a bit of like, will you suffer this? Will you show up and just practice this? But then when you have a bad day, like when you take an L, will you get up and do it the next, like, will you just pick yourself up and do it the next day, So I think that's part of the issue for people is that there are days where like 100 words come out and you're just like, I cannot get straight what I want to say. And it's really easy then to fill up your schedule the next day with other meetings or other things you have to do or whatever. I think it's just like the consistency to be like, okay, the writing desk was a painful pain. I mean, it beat me today, but I just have to get up and I have to do it the next day, you know?
The one of the things that I, realized, and it took me probably longer than it should have, but nobody ever really sat me down and told me this, but working on my doctorate, I realized that I had all this time and space to think and write, and there were days where it was literally just working on a paragraph,
Mhm.
writing,
Yeah.
rewriting, and it was just painful, and so much up until that point had been avoiding that level
Yeah.
of work and thinking, but then I got to this point where I'm like, "No, sit in it, sit in the discomfort. If all you get is just this one paragraph, at the end of the day, just trust that that will lead to something good." And that was the breakthrough for me. I was like, "Oh, if I take this time to form," because I realized it's like you're forming new neural
Yeah.
pathways. And
Mhm.
so like one crystallized paragraph,
Oh,
you've
yeah.
you've actually just summarized by forming those new neural pathways what a whole chapter might be or
Mhm.
what a whole thesis might be.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of like, well, I'm not writing a lot, so it's counterproductive. I didn't produce anything today. It's like, no, no,
Right.
no. You may have actually been at your most productive just producing one
Oh,
key
absolutely.
paragraph. But
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people realize that, and it took me probably longer than it should. But I tell students that all the time.
Yeah.
Don't feel like just
Yeah.
because you're not writing, thousands of words, you're not productive.
Yeah, and that one paragraph may then unlock, 8 pages, but if you had to get that one paragraph right, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So you have two new books out, actually.
Yeah.
That's right. So
Yeah.
Evangelism in an Age of Despair.
Mhm.
And what's the title of the second one that you co-wrote with your wife?
Oh, yeah, you're putting me on the spot. It's called, A Pilgrimage into Letting Go. So It's definitely not a memoir, but it's a more I mean, it's a more popular book it's kind of like a, kinda anti-parenting book. I mean, even that sounds a little bit too strong. It's like it's kind of an examination of both, like, pastoral leadership and parenting, um, well, really through Heart Mount Rose's kind of perspective on control and how modernity like forces control on us. So it's a little bit of a commentary on his little book, The Uncontrollability of the World, but then putting that in dialogue with um, kind of parenting practice and leadership. And, it's a bit of a confession of we're Cara, my wife and I are two firstborn children. So we love control and we're middle class kids from the 90s, so it's all about control and things. And so it's kind of a we went on this pilgrimage in Scotland and walk St. Cuthbert's Way, and it became really a kind of spiritual pilgrimage of really letting our kids go, like that we had to, yeah, just let them go, like watching them move into the next phase of young adulthood. And so yeah, it's kind of like the confession of control freak parents trying to tell you lessons we learned by failing really is what it's ultimately about, yeah.
Well, as a parent of a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, 2 boys, I feel like those sorts of confessions are needed, and one of the things that my wife and I talk a lot about is, gentle parenting, like the whole gentle
Mhm.
parent. I don't know if that's sort of taken off in Minnesota, but where I am, Canadian Pacific Northwest, it's gentle parenting, which I'm all for gentle and kind parenting.
Yeah.
Um, but we talk a lot about how gentle and kind parenting actually just becomes permissive parenting,
Oh, yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's this hyper reaction to a more controlling, hard-nosed type of
Yeah.
parenting that a lot of us grew up with.
Right.
Now I speak as a millennial. Are you a millennial or a Gen Xer? Are you
I'm a
a
Gen Xer, man.
Okay,
I'm a Gen Xer, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
similarities there, I
There
would
is.
say, in
Yeah.
terms of how we were parented.
I was parented very permissively,
Oh,
really permissively, like, kinda Stranger Things, kinda like you're just on your own doing whatever you want, and your parents you're kinda looking at your parents like, "Do they know what are they doing, and what are they thinking?" So, like, there was a, like, public service announcement in the States that would, that when I was a kid, that would come on at 10 o'clock that was like, "Parents, do you know where your kids are?" Because they didn't know where we were. I mean, what they had done in a very kind of controlling kind of way is just plant us in the suburbs. So, yeah, like another Canadian reference here. It's just like very Arcade Fire. You know what I mean? Like we're in these suburbs
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they're like haunted with meaninglessness, and our parents aren't really trustworthy. So you can see how the more controlled parenting comes out of that, I think, out of a reaction to that. But even like the gentle parenting stuff, I sometimes wonder if it's kind of a passive aggressive way of controlling your kids anyhow. Like instead of being just like, I'm the parent, you're gonna do what the hell I say. It's like, come on, buddy, let me encourage you to do this. But it's so
It's
I don't
giving choices that really isn't a choice because it's
right.
still the same destination. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's really I mean, I don't wanna say manipulative, but there you see some of it on at least the spoofs of it online or whatever, and it is a kind of bit like, "Come on, if I let's give you more sugar here and, see if that gets you to do exactly what I want you to do." So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm with you on that because one of the things that we have realized is, it's not easy playing the role of the adult where you
Yeah,
have to be the sort of barometer for what the world's gonna look like now and later in life. Like,
yeah,
you're whether you wanna be that or not, you have to teach him about a world that, okay, sometimes life offers you compromises and sometimes it doesn't.
right,
And the role of the parent is to help them figure out when there are compromises and when it's like, no, you just have to do this. And it's not even just about this, but it's like
right.
10 years down the line, how am I preparing you for a life that just shows up and tells you sometimes you can't compromise your way out of this, right? And
Mhm.
to me, I'm like, this is discipleship,
Right,
right? Saying yes to everything. They're looking to you for cues on what good boundaries are and what bad
Sure.
non-boundaries are, right? And, I I feel like I could write my own book of confessions about that, but, you mentioned Stranger Things, and,
Yep.
I think the power of Stranger Things is that of course, it's tapping into all the '80s lore, but one of
Mhm.
the things about the really good '80s films and TV shows and pop culture that I think still endures is because it really reflected that reality
Mhm.
of, parents kinda being checked out, and then you have someone like Spielberg, like, the parents are checked out or they're the villains,
Yeah.
and it's the kids who see that something is wrong, and it's the
Mm.
kids who band together and do what is right,
Right.
and they see more clearly the malaise where the parents either just checked out and like, "I don't know,"
Right.
or they're actively causing the issue, and I
Yeah.
think Stranger Things has tapped into that too because it's the kids that are the
Oh,
heroes
yeah.
of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
Yeah.
adults play a role, but really at those key moments, it's the kids.
Yeah, for sure. The kids are the protagonists moving the story along. They're the ones that are taking the heroic action, things like that, for sure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the Evangelism in an Age of Despair book.
Yeah.
You talk about evangelism right off the top, and you point out that it's a fraught term these days. So what prompted you to take this on despite it being a fraught theme?
Yeah. Well, it was part of that. I mean, it was kind of amazing to me, particularly being in, like, mainline communities, whether congregations or just like denominations. There's a bunch of times where people would kind of come up to me and whether they're lay people or my gosh, a bishop or somebody, and kind of like say under their breath, almost ashamed to say it, but like, maybe, I don't know, things are been so tough for us for the last decade or for the last 30 years or whatever. I mean, I hate to say it, but maybe we have to think about evangelism. It was almost like an apologetic kind of phrase, but I found it interesting both that they were kind of ashamed of it, but also that they felt like maybe they needed it. So there's this kind of strange way, I think, at least in American Protestantism, that evangelism is kind of feared or feel like it's potentially dangerous, but maybe is needed. But that also, puts it in the kind of sphere of thinking that we need it for some kind of winning of market share again. Like we need. I hate to say this, and maybe this violates like my commitments to pluralism or tolerance or interreligious dialogue or whatever. But we need more people, so maybe we just need to do evangelism. Maybe we just need to, swallow hard and do this. And so I just kind of wanted to pick that up and think about it. So that was at one level. But the other level was to trying, I think one of the main thrusts of my project has been to try to think of all the practical forms of ministry through Luther's theology of the cross. And so this is a kind of an attempt to think, okay, like if evangelism has been a kind of classic practical form of ministry, what would it mean to think of it? How could one, especially in this contemporary moment, think about evangelism through the theology of the cross? So I think that's kind of what took me into it, to be honest. And so so that's what I was kind of after.
Responding to that last point, I think what people are reacting to is a triumphalistic evangelism
Hmm. Hmm.
and how that's leveraged in all sorts of ways,
Right.
not just for empire building in terms of, you know, churches and particular faith expressions, but even socially, culturally, politically, and
Oh
so
yeah.
on. But yeah, you moving towards a different types of evangelism through the theology of the cross, which already is interesting to me and I think counterintuitive because a theology of the cross is a story about perceived failure,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how do you actually start outreach, which we
Yeah.
tend to think of in very consumeristic,
Yeah. Yeah.
triumphant
Absolutely.
terms, but starting actually with the story of a crucified savior.
Hmm.
Of
Yeah.
course, yes, resurrection, but actually starting with a story of loss, at least according to worldly perspective.
Yeah, and in many ways, I think like the theology of the cross, I think to grasp the radical nature of it, that's been kind of through the tradition, back to Luther, but in many ways back to Paul, is to say, it's not even the illusion of failure. It absolutely is failure. Like it is death, it is loss, it is brokenness, and that's what makes it so amazing. Is out of not the illusion of that actuality, out of that actuality something completely new comes out of it. Life does spring out of death. So that that's I'm trying to imagine that, but what that creates is a little bit. I think what I'm concerned about as people read the book is that in some ways it ends up being more of a theology of consolation than actually like. I feel like some people are gonna be like, "Oh, this isn't really about evangelism." I mean, I'm trying to give a picture of what evangelism might look like inside of this, but usually when we read evangelism books, it's like, 6 models of way evangelism's been done, kind of justifying kind of forms of evangelism, maybe scripturally or within the tradition. And this is really, I think, maybe where the ground is made more broken is trying to lift up a theology of consolation. And it does have the implication of putting like discipleship and evangelism really close together. And I think one could say, like, well, where's the what's the difference between kind of discipleship and evangelism here? They feel glued together, and I guess my response would be, yeah, exactly. Like that's what I'm trying to do, and I want to. I mean, go through the theology of the cross because I just think it is my kind of theological way of imagining the way God acts in the world. But I do think evangelism has been triumphalistic throughout the 20th century, really throughout the 19th century and 20th century for sure. But also, it's got linked up post-war, late 20th century, even to our day, to a kind of lifestyle branding. Like in many ways, like the TV show Mad Men is about how evangelism moves to consumerism. Like the selling of products becomes evangelistic. Like that's the whole story arc of Matthew Weiner's Mad Men is like Don Draper becomes the evangelist who realizes the way you sell Hershey's bars is by this evangelistic move, like that's what you do. And so I think what creates this dynamic of people being like utterly uncomfortable with evangelism and then also like, well, I'm open to it because essentially we are being evangelized every second of the day through a certain kind of consumer culture that's trying to pull us into a kind of lifestyle branding.
Yeah, and that is a good way of describing this story that you craft, that runs throughout the book, and it's a fictional story, but it's based on the types of
Yeah.
realities you're talking about. And I felt that to be a really imaginative but also helpful exercise as you're you're crafting a lived theology as you're doing theology. So do you wanna
Yeah.
talk about that piece and how that's running through as you're forming this
Yeah.
theology that you're sketching out here?
Yeah, probably like this is I don't know. This has been my kind of methodological approach too. I mean, I'm a practical theologian, and I feel like the way that the discipline works as a practical theologian is like you have to do research. Like you have to do some kind of empirical study. You have to do some kind of qualitative or quantitative research. And I mean, we don't need to get into this now, but I'm just not I don't believe that, first of all. And secondly, I'm not all that interested in that. But I do think the onus is on me as a practical theologian to not only talk about kind of practical forms of ministry, but to be as concrete as I can be and to attend to like concrete realities. But I do think one of the ways methodologically to do that is to use kind of fictional story too, And if I was writing a academic monograph, I probably wouldn't do that. But really, all my writing has been this kind of in betweener stage of kind of I'm writing for pastors and ministers, but I'm trying to write deep kind of intellectual books that they can read. So I'm trying to change their imagination. I mean, it's really that's what we're after here is like to change folks, the reader's imagination for how they think about ministry. And so story is going to, I think, be much more helpful than, empirical table or something on that. But I also just do think that theology is done best when you don't tell it, but show it. So the story bears the weight of kind of showing what this looks like. And, I do want to respect the reader enough to say, like, I'm not going to give you 8 bullet points or 8 bullet points at the end of each chapter on how you could do evangelism in your church. I don't know your church. You're smarter than I am. Like, you're cued into what's going on better, but I can give you a story of maybe what this looks like, and hope that inspires your own creativity and your own engagement with your own context. So this story, like, it really goes back to, somebody recommended a book to me. I think it was called, The Gospel of Wellness.
Hmm.
I think I referenced it in the book, but I was inspired by the story that like kicks off this book, which is this woman's like a New York Times columnist on like the wellness. She's like a true believer. She's been evangelized for wellness, and she's been writing about it and is an influencer on it. And then her father dies, and she's just utterly alone. Like, there is no one to be with her, and it's become a bit of a genre, I suppose, with kind of hyperly secular people who, especially in the UK, you see this, who kind of are turning back to religion because they're all of a sudden find themselves in a void of meaninglessness and no moral codes, no practices to deal with these big realities. And in some sense, she becomes one. Like, she is kind of nominally Jewish, and she just yearns for her Jewish tradition where someone would come and sit with her in the midst of this. So that was the kind of inspiration of this story, is like, what would it mean, particularly in this cultural context where I think people are just deeply unhappy and incredibly lonely. What would it mean to kind of evangelize or think about the invitation into a kind of sacramental encounter, or a real encounter with the presence of Jesus Christ, as coming through the practice of consolation, of being with people in the midst of their sorrow. And in particularly in this society, I think in this kind of Western society, that this global capitalist society, I think is probably a better way of saying it. Gosh, it just imposed so much deep forms of loneliness on people. And when they find themselves in real human experiences of grief and loss, like the loss of a father, or the illness of a child, or even the loss of a job or something, there's just, I mean, you can post it on Facebook or on your social media site and you will get reactions, but that is not, the recognition of that for a spell is not the same as uh, consolation of someone actually sitting with you and bearing this grief with you.
That's the constructive move that you make throughout, is to say that we don't have to look too far or read too much or listen or watch too much to notice that there is loneliness, there's despair,
Yeah.
there's aimlessness, and even with the so-called success story, um, a lot of what may seem to be success and meaning and triumph and so forth, uh, the reality may be a lot more grim and a
Mhm.
lot more lonely and a lot more rife with suffering and isolation than
Mhm.
maybe it would seem. And
Yeah.
in that sense, it's being honest about how bad it can get, but also this is the consolation is, uh, if we're talking about evangelism, sure, we can take the triumphalist route. It's like, okay, well, now we just need to provide people with better experience and we
Right.
need to compete with,
Right.
the mammon and capitalism, right?
Right.
Bigger budgets, flashier things to draw people in, and we'll hope we can get conversions. It's like, maybe that's not
Mhm.
what we have to offer.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the step towards friendship,
Mhm.
right? Not
Yep.
sort of converting them to an ideology or truth propositions, but simple presence and care when nobody else does. And not
Mhm.
just the sort of comment on, the Facebook post of, I'm really struggling right now. I lost somebody or I just lost my job, but actually following through and picking up the phone and saying, hey, we haven't
Mhm.
chatted for a while, but I just want you to know, like, let's meet up. Right.
Yep.
And not, you know, with some particular end that you kind of have to wait for the opportunity, then pounce, to like get the
Right.
gospel out, but actually just that presence and relationship that
Mhm.
might lead to things that you couldn't even have foreseen. And I don't want to spoil the end of the story, but I really love how there's kind of a ricochet effect, right? Where it's like the
Mhm.
initial kind of person
Yeah.
who is sort of brought into the church fold, you think that that's going to be,
Yeah.
the win, as it were, but then it's actually through her that you get to other people. And
Right.
that's just not something that fits nicely in a, 5-point
Mhm.
evangelism plan or a blueprint. But it's actually incredibly simple, at least theoretically,
Yeah.
of just showing up and being a friend when nobody else is willing to show up,
Right.
right?
Yeah, and in the story, I mean, like, one of the things I wanna point to is, like, there's no sense of, like, an evangelism committee that then comes up with a plan, and then laminated cards are given to the community, and bracelets are, there that like, there's no kind of strategy, and I don't mean to be kind of flippant about that, maybe that's helpful to some communities, but really this community, the way I'm imagining this is a very small church, essentially, they just live with this deep kind of watchword that they follow Jesus into sorrow. And where there's sorrow in the world, they go into it, and not for any instrumental purpose, not because they think, "Okay, this is when you get brand loyalty, is when people are at their weakest, then you give them the product, and then, then you have someone, you have a buyer committed for life." No, it's that there is a deep sense that they have been formed to imagine that Jesus to know, to have experienced that Jesus Christ is present there. I mean, that's the kind of theology of the cross, the practical theology of the cross kinda coming out there. So these people, like I really tried to tell the story not as there's a pastor in it, of course, but it's really lay people that this occurs. I mean, it's someone who's running HR, and all of a sudden has this situation, and sometimes it in many ways needs to violate some HR rules to just simply, has these dual narratives of the kind of bureaucratic instrumental reality playing in her head that she's responsible to, but also this deep kind of Christian calling that here is this human being who's suffering. Here's a way she's been formed as a disciple to follow Jesus into suffering, for particularly to look for Jesus Christ in suffering. So she's just willing to be present. She's just willing to be there, to see it, to say it. But there's no guarantee in the midst of that, like that's I really wanted to make it not a like, if you do this, it will all work out. Like this woman it's done for basically just says F off and it's over. Like she just disappears. She just,
Yeah.
and there's a way they do ministry, and they really help her in this time, but then it's just like real life. All of a sudden this person isn't there. But it does open up to other realities and the witness and the ability to go into this depth. Gosh, especially in this culture, people are just I mean, it's so unusual when you are hell bent on trying to be happy to, like even there's a certain kind of sense that I think we live with that sadness corrupts happiness. So if you're even near sadness, it will disease your happiness. And so we just are kind of repulsed by that, and that just pushes people, I think, into this deep, acute loneliness.
Yeah. That is another part of your book where you perform a paternity test on modernity. That's the that's the term that I
That's
use as sort of
yeah, but
what yeah,
we talked about like generations here. I just want the
yeah,
Gen X cred here for, it's like goes back to Pearl Jam, who you thought
yeah,
was your daddy is not your daddy.
yeah, yeah. So do you wanna talk about the paternity test that you perform in order to tell us, who our dads are, as it were, and why they've produced this sort of, this these sort of dual realities that produce despair, where it's like hyper rationalism on the other hand, and
Yeah,
then the pursuit of happiness and well-being on the other, with a pathological inability to just admit that we're not okay,
yeah,
right, to
yeah.
ourselves and to other people.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really building, especially in the first part of the book, before we take more of a distinct theological turn. I mean, people won't be surprised that Charles Taylor shows up, but also Stephen Toulmin shows up, which is, I think, a very accomplished philosopher of the 20th century who's not known often, I think, maybe as well as he should be. But he wrote this little book in 1992, I think, 91 or 92, called Cosmopolis, and it's basically his paternity test, and his point is, when he was at Cambridge as an undergrad or even as a PhD student or whatever, as a student, he was always told that it was the rationalists that created modernity. That it was Descartes and it was then Newton. It was math that did this. It was rational thinking, whether in the empiricist mode or the rationalist mode. It was this kind of enlightened thinking. But he tries to argue that actually that the creation of modernity comes from a late Renaissance person named Michel de Montaigne. And so what Toulmin is trying to do, and I'm kind of critical of this because it's really fascinating that Charles Taylor gives his lectures, The Malaise of Modernity, that are published as The Ethics of Authenticity in Toulmin's book. Both British trained, philosophers, one Canadian, one a Brit who ends up spending his career in America, and Toulmin. Toulmin and the same year they come out and they're so positive. I mean, both of these books are incredibly positive, and why should they be? It's the early 90s and the Berlin Wall is coming down and it seems like, the world is safe for democracy, and Charles Taylor himself is just positive anyhow. He's just a happy Quebecois guy. And Toulmin just thinks that like finally the ideals of the 60s that are not about rationalism, but kind of art and this kind of Renaissance sense of Montaigne skepticism, like this sense of like, what do we really know and how do we enter into dialogue, and rhetoric is more important than rationalism, that math is, that speech and language and poetry is more powerful than mathematical equations. Like this is all going to now flourish in the 1990s. Like the 80s is done. This is all going to happen. We're gonna be okay. I mean, there's this kind of sense of it, but I do think Toulmin's right that Montaigne is our daddy, if you will, to go on the Pearl Jam theme. Who you thought was your father is not your father. And but I think one of the things that Toulmin does, and Toulmin is really positive about this, but I think what Montaigne unlocks in us that has kind of turned on us is that the highest good is to be happy. Like in some sense, I mean, this isn't quite true, but I think from a modern perspective, it is that Michel de Montaigne is the inventor of happiness being the high good, that we should live to be happy, that the point of life is to retreat to your chateau and, sleep when you sleep and read when you read and garden when you garden, to simply be contented with your life. Like that's the point of it. It's not to do anything heroic, so it's very kind of anti-Nietzschean before Nietzsche ever existed. It's not like the heroic voyage. Don't do that. It's not even about political engagement. I mean, he leaves the French court. He's done with all that. And he's just going to go to his chateau and he's going to think and he's going to be content and he's just going to be happy. That's the point of it. That's the good. And I think I mean, I think the really interesting things about the American consciousness is one of the great fans of Michel de Montaigne was a little guy named Tommy Jefferson. And Tommy Jefferson read Montaigne and really wanted his vision of America, what would become the United States of America, was a land of people on their rural chateaus being Montaigne. It was going to be a country of happy people on their chateaus, and many of your listeners are just thinking of the utter incongruity of that statement as slave houses and things like that. I mean, he was imagining only certain people get to be happy on chateaus, but that was the idea. And so, it is no wonder that in the American founding documents, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is very much what Montaigne is after. And once that gets blended with, a certain consumerism and a late form capitalism and all those things, it just becomes essentially kind of a monster that eats us. But all of us live this way. We talked about parenting at the beginning of this. I mean, many of us are just like, whether we're going to be gentle parents or we're going to be, hardcore, strict parents. The whole point is we just want our kids to be happy. Like the point is just be happy. And it almost feels so self-evident to our imagination. but it's like very few thinkers would have ever thought this is a good idea. Like, you can't really get deep moral visions of life if the whole point is to be happy. And, no one should be against happiness. In some ways, I think like happiness is like money. If it comes into your life, take it. But living for it can eat your soul, like it can eat away your soul. And even someone like Blaise Pascal saw that very early on, like within 150, 200 years of Montaigne was like, this can't work. And it can't work because we are people of deep soul, not just people who want to be happy.
Yeah, and I think it's important to clarify that, of course, um, Aristotle is known for talking about happiness as the end of life, or at least saying, well, what do people say the primary end of life is? And he's like, well, some people say happiness. Let's start there. But that's a different type of happiness.
Yeah.
Wisdom fits in with that. And
Right.
what you're talking about, the sort of pre-modern form of it is probably more of what we think about now, where it might be some reflection as you're gardening, but I think you make the point, that it's about diversion,
It is.
right? "Oh,
Yeah.
isn't this nice?" Right?
Yeah.
I
Right.
feel happy in my chateau, or, our age's version of that is like, "Oh, we found a really nice Airbnb for this price, and, we
Right.
went with friends, it was great, and we had the fire going, and, it was just such a lovely time." We just
Right.
really needed to get away. Wonderful as that is, it's the pursuit or almost the addiction to recreating that experience
Yeah.
and sort of, pushing to the side just a awareness, a confession of the fact that it's not always that.
Yeah.
And where do we create spaces to acknowledge and confess to God, ourselves, and each other that it can't always be the
Yeah.
chateau. It can't always be the lovely getaway in the quaint little town with that coffee shop that you really like to go to, and
Right.
so on and so on.
Yeah, and like Blaise Pascal's point is like, even if you get there, like even if you're having that great Airbnb experience, I mean, there will be a creeping reality, because his whole point is you cannot substantiate your own being within the resources of your own being. Like, you need something outside of you. And I do think, like, in some ways, this is even what I'm no expert in Aristotle, but Aristotle's kind of getting at, in the sense of like, virtue has to be practiced, it has to be formed. Where I mean, I don't want to be too, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here, but Montaigne is thinking something a bit different than that. Like, it is this again, it's this kind of like ease of contentment of what it means to be content. And basically, Pascal's point is like, he knows it can't work because he's tried it. Like, he's been in the salons and he's gambled, and he knows how gambling works. Like, when you gamble, you kind of say to yourself, if I win this hand, I'll be happy. Like, if I win this hand, I'll be able to be contented. I'll pay off the car. We'll lower the mortgage. We'll be able to pay for the kids' education. Like, whatever it might be, if I win, I'll be content. And then Pascal's point is, you see this with all gamblers, himself included, is you win that big hand, you walk away from the table and you do feel it. It rushes in, contentment, happiness, you've got it. But it doesn't take very long where all of a sudden you feel the pull back to the table, because you feel a deep unease come over you. So his point is, then all you can do then is continue to distract yourself, continue to distract yourself with that. And it's one of the real epidemics of our time, I think, is that we have incredible tools to do that. Like, Car and I are both just dealing with the fact that, like, the junk food essentially of Instagram reels, of all of a sudden 45 minutes go by. But I think there's a deep sense, and I fall into this, is like, as soon as that sorrow of unhappiness starts coming up, just pull out your phone, just watch a dog video, just watch two dudes fight, or like,
Mhm.
one guy tell a cop he doesn't have the right to ask for his ID. Just watch that chaos, or that cute dog, or run down the road or whatever, and you can kind of distract yourself from this deeper existential reality that you are the kind of creature who cannot complete yourself. That we're not completely made for happiness. That there's a larger vision that maybe our souls long for.
In a way, the diversion of social media is like one side of the coin, because there's also this reality of the productivity machine as well, right? So you have to, and I think this connects to your previous book, right? Secular mysticisms, and this idea that you have to perform, you have to earn it, and if you're not, like, what are you doing?
Right. Right.
So, but the diversion is kind of the sort of rest after their performance, but you're just kind of vacillating between those two poles. And the
Yep.
way you were talking about Pascal, in a way, he's kind of the perfect blend of Montaigne and Descartes, where on the one hand, he's like the absolute genius,
Yeah.
right? Invented, the calculator, like just
Yep.
absolute prodigy. So he's got the reason and rationality down.
Yep.
But he also like puts that to use for the diversion of gambling and the hit,
Yeah.
the dopamine rush of gambling. And he basically gets to the point where he realizes that neither of those deliver.
They do.
And it's actually his relationships that draw him to the reality that it's neither of those things. It's something or someone else.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, talking about how you introduce Pascal, do you want to share where Pascal takes us, and
Yeah.
Gregory of Nyssa, and of course Luther, that if the diversion and the reason are the two sides of the coin, and they're sort of killing us metaphorically or literally,
Yeah.
how does Pascal's story offer us a way out of this
Yeah.
bind?
Well, I think the one thing that most people know when they hear the name Pascal is they think of Pascal's wager, and in many ways, gosh, I think particularly conservative Protestants have kind of thought of a certain version of Pascal's wager as the way you do evangelism, like, here we go. We got a 50-50 at play here. Either there is a God or there isn't a God. And you have to bet.
Apologetic.
Yep. And you have to bet your life on one of these. And the way we tend to read Pascal's wager is that, like, well, if you bet no God and you find out there is a God, you are screwed. Like, you are so screwed. But if you bet there is a God and then you die and find out there isn't a God, you haven't lost much. So what you should bet your life on is God, because it's a way better bet. We only have to be like a 13-year-old kid to be like, wait a minute, that doesn't really work. 'Cause if I lose out on a lot of fun stuff
Yeah,
potentially,
for real.
or whatever. And it's a totally vapid way of thinking about how one's formed and how one practices their very existence. Though, yeah, it doesn't work. But it actually isn't what Pascal means at all. I mean, Pascal actually isn't saying there's a 50-50 at play. He's saying, I mean, this is why, like, Voltaire found Pascal to be one of the greatest writers ever, but a dour boy. Like, he thought he was a dangerous guy. At the same time, he's like, beautiful writer, love when he takes on those Catholic priests, but my gosh, this is some dark stuff. Because his basic point is like, you're screwed. Like, the point isn't you have a 50-50 here. That's not the wager. His wager is you are going to be 100% unhappy. Like, because reason cannot answer the heart's deepest longings. So reason cannot work. The heart has reasons that reason does not know. And diversion will not work either. It will exhaust you. It will burn you out, which in late modernity is why we get Hartmut Rosa's acceleration society, because we have to just keep accelerating, whether it's workism, like you just said, or it's just staying on Instagram until 2 a.m. because we can't put it down. We just have to keep accelerating to the point of burnout. And his point is you're going to be unhappy. The wager is, his wager is if you will admit that, if you will walk into that confession of your unhappiness, his wager is you will find a great presence there, that you will find the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who will bring the fire of transformation. So the real wager is, are you brave enough to walk into your sorrow and interrogate it? I mean, he does want you to. He is still a man of the Enlightenment. He wants you to interrogate it. He just thinks you're going to find a great presence within that reality. Now, where I think Pascal is not helpful or potentially dangerous is he does that by himself. So it does have this kind of narrative of the great individual who does this. There's a bit of it's too individualistic. I don't think one can fall into their sorrow alone. I think the great piece of the Christian story, and this is what kind of moved me into thinking about a theology of consolation, is we need a community. We need a minister. Um, at its most classic form, we need a pastor to journey with us into this darkness. That this darkness can be too demonic. I mean, it can be too dark. It can crush us. And yet there is a certain power in the relationality of shared suffering that breaks it and turns it in this kind of sacramental way of what it wasn't into something else. And that's where we get like Gregory of Nyssa and Jean Gerson and then Martin Luther become these examples of people who give us a kind of consolation theology, a way of joining one another in these moments of sorrow that gives us a great vision of a transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked your reading of Pascal's Wager, not only because I think it's right, but it also sounds more Kierkegaardian,
Yeah, right.
where, in a
Exactly.
similar way, Kierkegaard's not appealing to unreason, right? He doesn't, um, sort of, lift up folly as a good thing. No, he wants clear thinking, but he also is clear enough that there's a certain point in which you have to make a leap, or,
Hmm.
the story of Abraham is he has to be willing to raise the dagger and
Hmm.
take a leap. And all of us are leaping to something, whether we are conscious of it or not. So why not take a leap towards something that is always, or someone who is always already acting and
Yeah.
acting in love? And there is a risk there, but you can't get out of it. So why not
Mhm.
leap towards um, the possibility that there's a creator there to catch you? But as you point out, the maybe even the sort of performed individualism of Pascal, right? Because you talk about the role that
Yeah.
his sister played. Kierkegaard, infamously broke up with the love of his life.
Mhm.
Why that is, scholars will talk about that until Jesus comes back. But this kind of, uh, if you knew my family and you knew me, like I'm doing you a favor, or it's the either or, like taking the hard way out, or whatever it is, like you are not and I am not sort of baptizing sort of isolation and individualism. It's saying like first step is to confess the sorrow
Mhm.
and not run away from it. And the second step is to reach out to people, right?
Yeah.
And to be the type of person that other people can reach out to.
Right.
And when you pay closer attention to Pascal's story, or when you hear about Gregory of Nyssa and the role that his sister played, or you look at Luther and the way that he was discipled by a pastor, right?
Yeah.
You don't get these figures without a community who offered
Exactly.
them consolation and discipleship and guidance in those moments where they felt lonely and needed somebody outside of themselves to help get them through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I guess, Luther becomes the major example here. I mean, if people get to the end, which hopefully the story keeps them to the end. I mean, Luther has this deep sense that we are the kind of creatures who need others, that we need others to be with and for us, and that Jesus Christ becomes present in that with and forness. So I mean, one of the other inspirations of the project was really thinking about Luther because especially teaching at a Lutheran seminary, the polemical Luther is always glorified. The Luther that basically says the Pope can eat my farts. Like that's the kind of Luther everyone loves.
Yeah.
I mean, which basically you think that I'm, just being a Billy Madison loving 90s guy saying that, but it's he actually basically says that.
And a whole
Um
lot more.
in a whole lot more about more taking a crap and things like that. Like that's just Luther at his best or worst, depending on what you think. But like my school, there's been a tradition at like my school and other Lutheran schools I know that just really glorify the polemical Luther because he is a genius and he is bold and he is heroic. But it also warps the Luther that's a pastor that writes these letters to people who have lost children, or bears these sorrows as a pastor. And so I also wanted to kind of get into this project to raise this consoling pastor Luther that plays within that. But there's a deep sense that comes out of Luther's own experience of the abyss, of taking the leap, and he has this deep sense that this very hard German word to translate, Anfechtung. I mean, this sense of your temptation, but it's really like this giving into despair, this giving into God not being good. But what's really interesting about Luther is he doesn't ask you to make a great choice of the will to deny that. He asks you, much like kind of Pascal picks up, to fall into it and to recognize that you can never really escape from it. And therefore, for Luther, the faithful Christian is the one who lives like the psalmist in joy, in celebration, but also in deep lament and deep sorrow. And he thinks that that's where Jesus Christ moves. That's where Jesus Christ is present. That's how we live out this reality of the cross. So to me, a theology of consolation links up and has to link up with a theology of the cross, or else the theology of the cross just tumbles into a certain kind of scholasticism on the backside where it just becomes about a kind of dogmatic assertions about justification, and not, which it is a certain assertion about justification, but it's so lived. It's such a kind of hermeneutic for how God acts and moves in the world, and it's really lived out with how Stupitz cares for Luther in the midst of his own deep, deep anxieties and sorrows, and fears, by telling him to look to the face of Jesus Christ, like to look to the crucified God for comfort and consolation in the midst of this.
Yeah. I love that space that you give to Luther, right? Teaching the Psalms and also teaching philosophy and um coming to a point where he kind of pushes back against Neoplatonism and Aristotelianism, where he's like,
Yeah.
"But I'm reading the Psalms,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or the,
Right.
um,
Right.
and
Right.
it seems that this God, in the prayer book of Israel, moves,
Yeah.
changes,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And coming to grips with that positions us to participate in God's sorrow and consolation. And of course,
Yeah.
the cross is the ultimate disclosure of that. And I think about this a lot in terms of justification, and like we
Mhm.
tend to think about it more in the like I say the universal we. It tends to be treated more in sort of legal terms or
Yeah.
like status before God terms. We're
Right.
justified even though we're not. Christ's work on the cross and the
Mhm.
resurrection justifies us. So, our sin is no longer viewed as sin because of Christ. Um, but I learned from Kierkegaard that justification is also like a temporal and spatial justification in
Mm.
the sense of like you justify your text. Right, so
Yeah.
it's not just legal positioning, but it's
Right.
actually, like, existential positioning where you stand, but if it's the cross that does that, the cross is a brutal
Yeah.
event, there's triumph on the other side, but, you look at the people who are there to the end looking at him, and he's dying,
Yeah.
and he says, to his friend, "Hey, you're can you take care of my mom?" And
Yeah.
mom, can you take care of my friend? And, this is your sister now. This is your brother here. And I think a lot about that as the new type of family that's created at the cross,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that new type of family transcends, biology. It's
Yeah.
like the kingdom of God family, and that is your justification as well.
Yeah.
And there's a, well, what are the mechanics of that? And it was like, there's an inscrutability to it, right?
Mm,
We can only see the reality of that in part. And the
yeah.
part that we see is beautiful and good, and it does offer us consolation, but the other part we won't see
Right.
until the eschaton. And, you know, very simply, what this means is don't run away from that, run towards it, lean into
Exactly.
it.
Yep.
Resurrection is on the other side. Hope
Yep.
is on the other side, but you can't get there. You can't get to the Psalms of celebration without Psalms of lament,
Mhm.
which, you know, being embedded in a North American evangelical context, such as I am, we don't we don't do that. We don't do lament.
Right.
Right. You know, it's
Yep.
even the hymns, most of them are the triumph ones.
Yep.
And then the popular praise and worship stuff. Yes, there's brief mention of struggle, but it's always, you know, tied up in a nice bow.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's false consolation. That's
It
not
is.
that's not
Yep.
real
Yep.
consolation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in many ways, it's exactly what Luther says in the Heidelberg Disputation. It's calling good evil and evil good. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so, I mean, I think a way to summarize what I'm getting at, and I think what you beautifully just said is, you know, I don't think I use it in this book. I use it in so many books, but the Grenwald painting, this representation of Jesus crucified, and on one side you have John the Baptist, who is pointing at the crucified dead body of Jesus Christ. And we often think of evangelism as that. It's preaching the logic of this event. He's got the scriptures open, he's testifying to it. And I do think there is a charismatic piece here. I'm not trying to take that
Oh
away.
yeah.
But, you know, for most of the 20th century and the 21st century, we thought of that as evangelism, or that is even the theological task, to be, as Karl Barth said, to be the bony finger of John the Baptist, you know. But we forget the other side of the painting. And on the other side of the painting is John, the beloved disciple, consoling Mary the mother, and Mary Magdalene is on her knees in sorrow at the cross. And John happens to be the only person in the whole scene who's not looking upon the cross, because he's looking upon Mary the mother as her heart's being ripped out in this sorrowful experience. And I guess what I'm trying to get at with evangelism is to think about that side of the painting. To think about maybe this is a moment where the consolation side of the event of the cross needs to be lifted up because of this cultural milieu that we're in. Maybe there'll be another time where we have to emphasize again. Like, you know, I think Karl Barth rightly wanted to keep German-speaking Protestantism from being co-opted by the kind of cultural Protestantism that justified the war. So he wanted to go back to the Bible and the bony finger, God is in heaven, you know, a little bit of Kierkegaard here too, God is in heaven and you are on earth, you idiot. You know, like there's a qualitative distinction between time
Yeah.
and eternity here. You know, that there's times within the church where that has to be proclaimed and never lost, but it has to be emphasized. But I think we're at a moment now, or what I'm at least trying to explore in this book is, are we at a moment where the consolation side needs to be there? And that has been in the tradition too. And that's why Gregory, that's why Gerso, that's why others come up, because whether it's been in the, you know, the 4th century, or whether it's been in the 14th century, there's been times where the consoling side of this has to be emphasized. And I think we're at a moment now where that's the case.
Yeah. Well, and maybe we'll land the plane here, but you make this point early on where you say the stats out there are showing that, you know, attendance is in decline for, you know, evangelicalism, and you're like, well, so logically people would say, well, that's good news for the mainliners, you know.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
And we're like, but also they're struggling too, so what do we make of that? But I think what you're talking about here helps us make sense of whatever tradition we happen to be a part of. It helps us make sense of um the lack of reckoning with what we have in view is, um it's not better experience, or call me out if this is a caricature here. It's not better experience evangelicalism, and it's not just like, can we just dial in the liturgy a bit more,
Yeah, no,
right?
I think it's fair. Yeah. Yeah, you're
Right.
right.
And right, that's the problem. We got to dial in the liturgy a bit
Hmm.
more, or move this around and tweak this, but actually, um it's that first step of consolation. And
Yeah.
yes, proclamation, absolutely. We're both Protestants, but
Yep.
actually this maybe I'm shoehorning here, but it goes back to our initial conversation about teams and trust,
Mhm.
right? Like the proclamation piece um is it takes root more when the person proclaiming something to you is somebody that you actually trust and was
Absolutely.
there for you when you were in your lowest moments,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's kind of the integration that we're looking for. Like at times we do need coach to tell us what's true.
Mhm.
But if all he's doing is yelling,
Right.
it doesn't help. But if coach shows up for you when you haven't scored in 12 games or whatever and still cares about you as a person, then when
Mhm.
he does sort of really, speak strongly or just give you, that critical realist approach, that's going to resonate a bit more.
Mhm.
And we
Yep.
will have our tendencies, we all do, but what does it look like to start with that simple move of friendship and consolation and from there see what God does with that?
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, exactly. And maybe, to take this full circle, because you're a Canucks fan and I'm a Wild fan and a Minnesota sports fan, we really know consolation. And this is all just autobiographical because we just take so many L's in life. and, and
I
Quinn Hughes is going to get traded in a few
holy
weeks.
shit. Oh man. Sorry, I
Yep.
think you may have just diagnosed why
I
I'm more
think
of a Lutheran than I am a Calvinist
yeah,
in my theology.
right.
Why,
Yeah,
like,
that's
you know,
this is why I love the theology of the cross because I'm a
yeah,
Minnesota sports
yeah,
fan and it's just
exactly.
nothing
Because
but suffering and pain. Yeah,
yes, if you're, I don't know, if you're like a Florida Panthers fan right now, you're all
yeah.
about like
My gosh.
predestination and unconditional
Oh my gosh.
election because you're the
Yeah.
elect.
Well, this is why I don't know that we recorded this, but this is why I have a Man City shirt on right now, is because when I picked my Premier League team, someone even said to me, "You should be a Spurs fan because they're like the Vikings. They are always good, but they never win anything." It's like, nope, I have enough of that suffering in my life. I'm just gonna go with the New York Yankees for a while. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like I'm just gonna win trophies and see what that feels like. So, but
yeah,
even that, I find that I get let down and angry. Whereas
yeah,
my friend Rolf Jacobson says, it's Old Testament scholars like sports is a God that does not save. It just breaks your heart over and over again.
yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah, yeah. I think I think that's I think that's right. One of the things that I would say, and maybe this is where we can end, is neither of us cheer for Liverpool,
yeah.
but Liverpool, in my humble opinion, has the best tagline, "You never walk
Oh,
alone."
I know. I love it. It's
And
great.
maybe that's the ethic, right? We never
Mhm.
walk alone, and that's the
Mhm.
consolation.
Yep, and that's a reflection of theology of the cross, is that there is no suffering, no isolation, no grief that God doesn't inhabit. That
Yeah.
God is present in it. So, yeah,
Look at that.
unfortunately, Liverpool, we have to agree, has the greatest tagline,
Yeah.
even though we hope that they suffer and lose every match from here on out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm an Arsenal fan, so I know what it is to play well and not necessarily win cups. So,
Well, we'll
thanks
hope
for
for that again this year. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for your time, Andy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.